Incommunicado Detention and Torture of the Ukrainian Prisoners of War by Russia. So today we're going to discuss the results of this report, the report from the Amnesty International based on the interviews of 104 people, including ex POWs, documenting all the crimes committed against our POWs by the aggressor country, crimes against humanity, war crimes. And today I would like to present our today's speakers: Veronika, Velch, Director of Amnesty International Ukraine; Olena, Kozachenko, Research Project Assistant at Amnesty International; Lera, Burlakova, Media and Communications Officer there; also Maksym, Kolesnikov, veteran and former prisoner of war; and Nataliia Yepifanova, head of the NGO Warriors Liberation. Thank you for being with us here today. So, Veronika, let's move to your presentation then. Hello. It's a pleasure to see so many interested people, and for us it's always a joy to share what we have collected with you. Amnesty International went through difficult times. Well, the whole country went through quite turbulent times. Last year we set the team, the work, our vision of future steps. This is the first big survey that we did with the new team. We worked for 9 months on that report. We had also to convince the Amnesty movement. Why? For the first time ever, Amnesty starts the first ever research, unprecedented, on POWs, prisoners of war. Previously, we did research in Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, about civilian prisoners, but POWs was not treated as the focus of the attention. But now, the situation in Ukraine is unprecedented. Huge number of Ukrainian men and women are being imprisoned in inhumane conditions by the aggressor. So we decided, let's start with this. The movement supported us. Now we are ready to present to you the results of our survey. It will not be as shocking for the Ukrainians, I understand, as shocking it is for the foreigners, because every time when we raise the topic of access to POWs, that these are hundreds, thousands of people who receive no correspondence, no medical attention, subject to tortures. Well, human rights defenders keep silence on that for some reason. That's why we are here, and then we'll use it with our next steps abroad. Amnesty International recognizes that the military conflicts in Ukraine started in 2014. In 2022, we declared it as an act of aggression. So many prisoners were taken 11 years ago as well, but we are focusing on those who were imprisoned from the kickstart of full-fledged invasion. Our report covers everything to do about the crimes committed, including disappearances and other crimes. We deal mostly with POWs, but also civilians and missing in action, MIAs, both among the military and civilians. The report clearly calls Russia the perpetrator, and it doesn't matter who performed them, like private companies, Wagner Group, or the proxies from Donetsk, so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, because we recognize that it's so-called Russia that manages those territories, thus it is liable for everything that is done there. The methodology included 104 interviews with former prisoners of war and members of their households who shared their memories, their experience of dealing with the governments and with the NGOs. It was tough, but valuable. The general number of Ukrainians who are currently at the occupied territories or imprisoned at the territory of Russia is inaccurate, but we are talking about thousands. So we need to speak out about this atrocious number of Ukrainians in their prison. We break those people, the wars, into 108 uh, killings of prisoners of war. Only in last year, executions and death in custody. At least two officials like Dmitry Medvedev and Ramzan Kadyrov requested not to take prisoners and to execute them on sight. One of our respondents, his name is Volodymyr Shevchenko, told us how, in front of his eyes, Ukrainian POWs were beaten to death, and the same happened to civilians. He told us about tortures, how people were drawn to suicides. The intentional murder of POWs or those who are no longer able to fight is a war crime. The next important topic is Incommunicado Detention. In 100% of cases, we heard that the Ukrainian POWs stay incommunicado with outside world. Out of 43 former POWs, only 5 claim that they at least once it leaves a letter or a phone call, but it always happens after that person was agreed to give an interview to the Russian TV channels. Another crime against the Ukrainian POWs, tortures. We heard a lot about that, and all the evidence from our interviewees claim that this is systemic, large-scale, invasive phenomenon that happens at every single stage when our soldiers are imprisoned. Tortures with electricity, other tortures including sexual ones. I don't want to talk about those atrocities out loud because this is the impunity is just something that should be qualified as war crime, and those people will be held liable. The refusal to provide medical help. Well, when Geneva Convention says that you need to give painkillers and they're not giving, that's violation of Geneva Convention and is qualified as a war crime. Unfortunately, almost in 100% of cases, our POWs receive no medical treatments, receive no medicines, medication treatments, like basic antiseptics. People just are left to their own devices. You survive it or you don't. And this is systemic, and this could only be qualified as a war crime. Often enough, the POWs are being punished for requesting the medical help for themselves or their comrades in arms. Another difficult topic for the Ukrainian society are the forcible disappearance. 45,000, that's how many of those people were disappeared. Most of them are still the prisoners. Some of them probably have died, but their families keep hope. Last year, out of 706 POWs exchanged by Russia, 25% were people who were previously qualified as forcibly disappeared. And Russia shares no information, which is the form of manipulation, coercion, etc. Moreover, we faced cases, and the colleagues will confirm that, when POWs would be shown on the central TV Russian channels, and we know that examples of families and households when Ukrainian families that try to get some evidence that their loved ones still are alive. We talked to the International Committee of Red Cross, ICRC, and they asked us not to share the information they shared with us, but they confirmed that this is the problem, that the international community might be helpful in being involved. Then the next one are fake trials, persecuting the military for serving in the army is the violation of the Geneva Convention, but disallowing them to expect fair trial, that's war crime. We can see all those mock trials in Russia, fake trials, when they tried applying the Russian criminal code, domestic criminal code, is contempt to justice system at large, because we need to recognize that prisoners of war, ex-military, should not be persecuted for the fact that they fought for their land. They have right for fair trial, for all the needed judicial procedures, which they denied. Now, in year 4, we can not expect that Russia will hear about this problem and accept it, but the international community should recognize that all those problems of denial of medical treatment, executions and deaths in custody, no correspondence, no access to humanitarian organizations. Well, none of our POWs were visited by international organizations. Why those visits should happen? It should have the deterrent effect, preventing the enemy to exercise torture against our POWs. Another thing that we require repatriation of heavily wounded, and this might become the instrument to prevent deaths of Ukrainian POWs, because we are aware how many, a lot of Ukrainian POWs are being imprisoned while being wounded. They need to be immediately repatriated based on the decision of mixed commissions. That is to say, this medical commission should include 2 neutral doctors from neutral countries and 1 from the enemy country, and they decide whether this person requires medical attention, and if the enemy is not able to provide it, and it is not providing it, then they should repatriate them. Ukraine claimed that such commissions are ready to be established, and they have been established by the Ukrainian side already, but that's where Russian can go on concessions for sure. Now, a very painful topic of civilian prisoners. Often enough, those civilians go through the same exposure to tortures, enforcements, fake trials, but there is another component, so-called arbitrary arrests of civilians, so that the occupation authorities would fight for the regime through indoctrination of children, from arrests of Ukrainian teachers who are all civilians, also enforced disappearance of civilians. This is a felony, and the tortures and the enforced disappearances of civilians are not only war crimes but also crimes against humanity. There's only one position here: release the Ukrainian civilian prisoners. The only country liable for this is so-called Russia, but the international community should introduce more systemic approach, using the International Criminal Court, involve as many countries as possible in identifying why this topic has not been in the uh, focus of attention, and the Amnesty International provides the evidence to articulate what needs to be done looking forward. Thanks a lot. The floor goes to Olena Kozachenko, who visited Russian POWs who have been detained here in Ukraine, so that our evidence would be unbiased. She also interviewed the Ukrainian households. Well, thank you, Olena. What have you um, identified as challenges during those interviews? Well, thank you. Before I start sharing what we did with you, I would like to thank all the interviewees. That was extremely important to talk openly to the family members and households. It was very difficult for me, but I could not possibly imagine how difficult it was for them. So I'm grateful to all of you, all those relatives who are present here today on site, and I'm grateful to my team who supported me. Uh, well, Russian prisoners of wars, we didn't include them in our report, only because the way they're being detained violates no Geneva Conventions whatsoever. We made those field trips uh, along with my colleague from London. So uh, I stayed aside. I wanted his interviews to be as unbiased as possible. So he was interviewing those Russian prisoners of war, and all they said, everything is fine, we got medical attention, we've been well fed, we have access to library, they can go into the gym, they work, they are being paid, they watch TV, and on the day I visited them, it was the day of medical checkup. So I've seen them being prescribed lenses or eye glasses once every 4 months. Red Cross representatives visit them and monitor how well they're doing. All of them have the bank account opened to them, and their relatives could transfer funds there, and there is the shop in the prison, and they can buy something to eat or to drink there. They also receive parcels, of course, from the family members who haven't forgot about them. Uh, what else? Some of them complained, and I have to voice it out, of course. One of the complaints was a man decided that his rights are violated because the uh, wardens address him in Ukrainian. Also, he complained that no vitamins have been given to him recently, and that he is there for 1+ years. He is the former athlete, and initially he couldn't go into sports because the gym was created a bit late, and he was satisfied that finally has access to the gym. According to our survey and the report of the monitoring mission of the United Nations, the rights of the Russian POWs have not been violated. Ukraine sticks to the requirements and terms and conditions of the Geneva Convention. All of them are in good shape. Well, of course, some people have been wounded before or are amputees. These are pictures from the place we visited. As you can see, people following the prison schedule. I mean, they go out only when allowed for their indoor walks, but everything seems to be fine with those guys. Now, let's get back to the Ukrainian prisoners of war. I have interviewed a huge number of the relatives of the current POWs, those who were liberated from uh, prison. But Veronika told it all when she said it's inhumane treatment. They do not treat our heroes as human beings. And what's important is to support the relatives of the Ukrainian soldiers. Some of them are refugees now because they had to flee Mariupol, Berdyansk, wherever they could, and they keep fighting for the liberation of their loved ones, even though they're now abroad. But they keep fighting, of course. And uh, we all want to help them in this fight, of course. Let me finish on a positive note. When we were almost done with our survey and I was clarifying some details, one girl, when I called her and asked her to attend today's presentation, sent her a copy of the report, and she said, "Thank you, I would not be able to come, but I will read this report along with my husband because he was released in December 24. That's an unbelievable emotion, and I can only hope that all of our prisoners of war would be released as soon as possible." When Russian POWs claim that they don't have access to vitamins and they've been addressed in Ukrainian, well, it makes my job difficult, but I need to ask you, could you please share your story? Because it's been covered by international media. Everybody saw you how you looked like after the release. That was atrocious. We all feel there's pain when our released POWs come back home. So, what do you think we can help now, all of us? What we all could do to speed up the process of release? Thank you. Hello. While being in the Russian prisons, all of us go through the following procedure twice a day. It's called roll up. Twice a day, everybody stands up still, and then in the full silence, wait when the wardens will take them out of their cells to for head count and tortures. That's not the toughest part. When you are already in the corridor and you've been beaten, the toughest time is when you listen how your comrades in arms have been beaten for the next hour, hour and a half. When you hear when people, after months of hunger, are told, push up, make push ups, 200 push ups, and then they call it charged up with electroshockers. And all you can hear is your heart beating inside your chest. An hour and a half, 2 hours of tortures. And there's a sadistic game that they play. You cannot show that it's painful. That's what they constantly ask. Are you in pain? If a new one doesn't understand it, they hit you in the same place, then they add electroshocker, the baton, police baton, or they love plastic pipes. to hit people with. That's their know-how, because they leave uh, less evidence, but the pain is as excruciating as after being hit by a baton. So the fact that we have this report out, please, please treat it as a voice of pain. Men and women, military and civilians, who've been treated like this daily. You need to hear this voice of pain. Because after 2 months of being released, in 2 months I attended the OECD funded conference on torture. People who talked to me, they refused to believe that this is standard practice. Well, at that time I looked exhausted. I didn't back to my senses, and then I had the medical surgery. They saw me limping, so they recognized that I'm telling them the truth. But they could not possibly believe when I told them that this is a systemic practice. They thought that Russia, country of Tolstoyevsky, could not possibly perform such atrocities. It can, and it does, every single God's day. My cellmates have not been released just yet, not all of them. The last time I talked to one of the civilians who was released, he was a firefighter. He was cool. He was thrown into jail when he was trying to save people in Bucha. That was March 2022. He was released in August 2024, a civilian. And I went to visit him in hospital, and I asked him, Max, he said, thank God that you didn't go where they sent me. They would actually tie him to the low voltage electric system, and they would be exposing a civilian to electric shocks for 1 hour straight. So I believe what's important, what's vitally important, is to have a well-structured and well-evidenced picture of what's going on, so that when people wear beautiful suits, well, you all know what I refer to, so those suits without people in them, people living in beautiful golf courses, villas, would deny us calling a torturer, and a criminal, but we'll call a spade a spade. This is not something that we're gonna keep silent about. We will be revealing the truth, and that's why such surveys should be conducted. And unfortunately, for quite a while now, we will still need the collection of all that evidence. And whatever I'm sharing with you now could be shared by anyone who was released. I talked to so many comrades in arms, brothers in arms, because I visit all of them in hospitals after they're released. All I learn is things just deteriorate. In Taganrog, they jump on your chest cavity. And a friend from the Marines, who was my cellmate, told him that one of his friends was murdered when the rib was broken when they jumped on his chest, and he was killed there. In Mordovia, that's the region in so-called Russia, some of my brothers in arms from my military unit, they were forced to wear yellow plastic uniforms with the hoods in the middle of summer, when it was impossible even to breathe, for the whole day, including within the cells, not only 1 hour of the outdoors walk. So all we can do is share this truth. We cannot possibly accept this new formula of might makes right. We're not playing games. We fight for our lives. And that's what we need to show everyone. And what could be done? Well, first of all, the most severe tortures stopped only when we were included on the list of those to be released. So those wardens finally were told, don't beat up on those whom will release, so there would be no visible evidence left. And I know that one of my cellmates in November 22, a 63-year-old person, civilian, was brought into our cell, and his whole leg was one black mark because the wardens from the Caucasian mountains, Dagestani or Chechen or something, I mean, we couldn't even understand the language they were talking in. So they will line us up and they will hit every single one on with a baton on the leg. And so that's the person who was brought, who was released. And it was shown to the Saudi Arabia or United Emirates intermediaries. And only then we heard our wardens when they were discussing this. They were told, stop doing that, because through Adam Dilimhanov, who is responsible for the releases, and he is the liaison with Islamic countries, he said that, well, you lost your face in front of your Islamic partners because we need to speak about instances of those atrocities. But I don't believe that the enemy will allow the Red Cross to visit our prisoners of war. No way they will allow access. They never did, they never will. So I can only hope that as many people as possible will see, hear, and read this report, because being back there, we could not show any sign of pain, but you can. Thank you, Maksym. Maksym mentioned the sounds of pain, the voices of pain, so that people will hear those voices laden with pain. What should we do about this? Well, I feel physically sick listening to Maksym, but unfortunately, in our team, we have a bride to a POW, Veronika, whose husband was there for many years. We have wives of the military. I'm a veteran, war veteran myself. I have many sisters and brothers in arms who are still in prison. So for us, this is only the beginning. No way this report is the end of what we started. We did it only to kickstart the campaign. Amnesty International has branches in 130 plus countries, and this report will be shared everywhere and will be exposing people to the truth of what's happening there. I mean, all the Ukrainians know about the atrocities perpetrated in Russian prisons, but nobody understands that there is no communications allowed. It's all incommunicado, no medical assistance given. Well, let alone the foreigners. Of course, they could not possibly comprehend all that. And when we suggested this report, Amnesty International said, come on, these are combatants. But we told them, in Ukraine, being a combatant is not your career choice. It's whether you want to survive and fight for survival or die. Because Maksym, for instance, he was the cook And there are lots of former civilians who had to go and fight as soldiers. And we share this report with everyone, Japan, Korea, Great Britain, everywhere, so that everyone will hear it. But of course, we will be also sharing this reports and this evidence in other countries as well, fighting for three things: the right for correspondence. And we're talking not only about POWs, but who suffers the most are their relatives, parents, loved ones, children who don't even know whether their relatives are still alive and where they've been kept and whether they can be visited. There's a story of a boy, Dmitro, from Chernihiv region. His mom was killed because she left the basement searching for food and got killed. His father fought in the armed forces who became prisoner of war, and Dmitro writes letters for 2 years and receives no letters back. Ina Branovitska is here in the audience, and her son was killed by Russians, by Motorola unit, when he was seized by them. Another demand: access of international organizations to our POWs. This morning, a beautiful French journalist wrote the article about the International Red Cross keeping silent about the tortures that the Ukrainian prisoners of war are exposed to. And the third is repatriation. Ukraine has created mixed medical commissions, and it might be the tool for repatriation when medical experts from neutral countries would make the decision to release those who would no longer be combatants and those who are heavily wounded, because that's a way of the detergent against complete isolation, a deterrent against all the isolation that our boys and girls are exposed to, staying in complete isolation there. Also, we would like to tell the outside world that these are ordinary people who were forced to become warriors and heroes. We all recognize here that we're talking about not professional soldiers, but people who fight for their lives, and humanization of prisoners of war, documentation of all the evidence of the war crimes, crimes against humanity. This is something that we need to speak out, because this is a systemic, conscientious policy of so-called Russian Federation, and the involvement of NGOs and international governments to get involved. We don't expect that any particular country would only focus on POWs, but at least we hope that there will be protests in those countries. We have the letters written by the families, households of the Ukrainian prisoners of war, and during the protests in front of the Russian embassies, those letters would be read out loud, because that's their ability, at least to somehow voice out their messages to their loved ones. Alexander Hamanta made lots of photo portraits after those very difficult interviews, and we shared those pictures with our branch officers in 130 plus countries, so that they will disseminate those stories, those pictures. And of course, there will be petitions and writing letters. Well, the standard Amnesty activities will be writing letters not only to Russia, because, as you all recognize now, makes no sense, but to the foreign ministries and human rights ombudsmen in those respective countries, so that they will start pressuring Russia, that they will keep talking about this and to a certain extent, will be talking to the journalists. I'm a media officer myself, and I focus on all that, granted. But I believe that that's the most efficient tool for us to start telling everyone that's what Russia is doing, the country that somebody wants us to make deal with. There's a Nataliia Yepifanova here, and Amnesty International was quite a dampened reputation when the new team joined. Well, we are quite confident that we'll do things differently because we knew each other before, but sometimes it was so tough, especially in public space, and if Nataliia Yepifanova would not uh, open the doors for us to the Ukrainian authorities and to the Russian prisoners of war, nothing would have happened. So, Natalia, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm Nataliia Yepifanova from the NGO Warriors Liberation. Our job is to identify all of the prisoners of war and all of the MIAs, missing in action soldiers. And it's a tough going, it's very difficult. And first of all, I would like to thank Amnesty International Ukraine for performing such a colossal task. I am confident that people will listen to your powerful voice. Well, on the one hand, this is a colossal work that, on the other hand, might be treated as an everyday reminder of everyday crimes committed against Ukrainian POWs, but those daily reminders do work because we know that our POWs being released, they tell us that when you are on the list for release, you are being fed better, you are not being exposed to tortures. But mind you, it doesn't happen in all of the Russian colonies, but there are some gradual improvements still because of our exposure. Ukrainians are very proactive at the international arena, sharing information about those atrocities. And now all of those wardens in those crimes know that they are perpetrating war crimes, and there is no limit terms of limitation for those crimes. And the released POWs told us that in one colony, it's not the prison wardens that exercise torture, but often enough FSB agents are being brought busloads to perform those tortures. And recently, the governors of those prisons started opposing tortures being committed because they recognize that now they are criminally liable. But in order for everybody to know that this is the war crime that will be punishable sooner or later. But again, I'm talking only in light of the international laws, and it doesn't look like the signals we hear from the US now that the international law is still viable. And grasping this opportunity, I would like to invite journalists and residents of Ukraine on March the 6th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. There will be a protest in front of the U.S. embassy called "No Deals Without Freeing Ukrainian Prisoners of War." There will be no deal if Ukrainian POWs are not being released. Full stop. By this protest, we want to demonstrate that it's Russia who needs to prove that they're ready to be negotiated with, and we start with a very humanistic task of releasing exhausted Ukrainian POWs using the principle all of the Ukrainian prisoners of war exchanged for all the Russian prisoners of war. And I believe it's the job of the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian diplomats to share more to the international community about those war crimes perpetrated against our heroic POWs. For the third straight year, we're trying to plead, to ask the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine to initiate the special session of the United Nations on human rights. Those special sessions are usually performed as the reaction to grave crimes against humanity. There was such session back in 2022 when Bucha and Irpin stories became voiced out, but no other special session about those high-profile crimes against humanity were perpetrated. Our foreign ministry says it's impossible because 16 countries that need to be confirming their readiness to call for such special session, they say Ukraine will not find those 16 voices in favor of establishing such special commission. So, look, there is a formula of peace, Ukrainian formula of peace negotiations going on, and bullet 4 is releasing POW civilians, deported children. And this task force meets in the Human Rights Ombudsman's office. They report that they have uniform fronts, right? That they work together, but when this task force convened their session in the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Ukraine, there were 70 plus people attending, mostly ambassadors, who claimed that they're ready to work on releasing our POWs, but the Foreign Ministry claims that there will be no 16 votes in favor of creating such special session. Well, of course, people could be skeptical about, well, what would happen even if such session is being held? But who cares? We need to grasp and use every single opportunity to tell about the crimes committed by Russia. Every time when we visit other countries, we tell the representatives of the civic societies there, you are not even comprehending the scale of crimes committed by this so-called country. And it's important to keep talking about this. And for instance, in the UN, there is the Committee for Prevention of Tortures. But still, there has been not launched any single investigation of the violations in compliance with Article 20. Article 20 of the Convention on Preventing Torture says that it's the job of the UN to launch such investigations. And we met with those people, and they pretended that they haven't even heard about this, claiming that, well, no crimes committed, thus no investigation will happen. Of course, we talked to the Ukrainian prominent human rights activists, and they say that this is a political problem. In order to start this investigation in the Committee of Prevention of Tortures. A colossal political and diplomatic effort should happen. NGOs won't handle it on their own. The government should be involved, and the partners who are the members of the task force on Bullet 4 of the Ukrainian peace plan. According to the protocols to Geneva Conventions, there is the commission that should investigate violations of the provisions of those Geneva Conventions. And the secretary of the Geneva Conventions, the depository of those conventions, is being handled from the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Switzerland. And we talked to the Swiss ambassador on that. And we raised this issue here in Ukraine as well, elsewhere, but somehow, and I cannot understand why, it's so hush-hush still, because no investigations are happening, or whatever is happening is being done in secret. But all I can hope is that the Ukrainian diplomats will, especially in Switzerland, will bug this commission and would tell them, look, start even the first investigation and you will unravel the handful of other crimes. So this is the big question to our authorities, to the office of the president. Please make this happen. The international humanitarian law has the principle of responsibility. We want the torturers, the henchmen, to be afraid of the universal jurisdiction tool. Universal jurisdiction is the principle that should be implemented in all of the domestic laws of those countries that support international humanitarian law. Of course, every country could implement this principle the way they see it. Some implemented it deeply in all of the layers, others are still on the way of implementing. So, universal jurisdiction principle is that all the countries that comply with this principle, law enforcement agencies of those countries could initiate criminal investigations and instigate criminal cases against those criminals who perpetrated international human crimes against humanity. And that's on the last page of the report. Yeah. But neither the work group of this Formula of Peace task force speak about this, neither our diplomats are talking about this either. About a year ago, 8 months ago to be precise, our NGO sent to the various embassies the plea, the request to share with us the current status of how their countries implemented the international law principles. To Norway and Canadian embassies, we even brought it by the courier, those requests. So 8 months later, nobody answered. So our plea to the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian diplomats, please get proactively involved. Thank you, Nataliia, for mentioning all this, but first let's watch a brief video. Igor was shot from traumatic gun, and then they would say, oh, he's still standing tall. And then they started killing him. So 5 or 6 people are beating up on him. Then when they're tired, the next half a dozen will come in and continue the beatings. I'm aware of a case when a soldier was beaten to death at the second floor of that prison. According to the official statistics, 160 corpses of soldiers tortured to death were brought back in. But from my unit, 4 people who were released, their bodies were released. All of them had signs of tortures. If the ICIC has no accounting for them, they cannot even write the letter. Well, he wrote the letter, "Dad, I love you so much, I wait for you." They sent a letter, but we don't know whether this letter reached him. We have wrote so many letters, but we don't know whether our son received them. And often enough, sacks full of letters would be burnt in front of the prison walls. We wrote our letters, but they have not been received. And we learned about this from the cellmate of Artem in Taganrog and Perm. They claim that no letters arrived. And even if they arrived, they were not given them to read, and they were not allowed to write their letters themselves. I came back from Russian prison with vein problems on my legs, because every single day in Taganrog they were beating me with a baton against our legs, and we can hear cries from next door cells, sometimes 24/7, and all of us can hear those beatings. And they also then would tell me, for instance, if you don't cooperate, we'll do the same to you. Some of our girls were beaten when they were taken to the office of prosecutor to Donetsk. That's when the girls were beaten up on. We heard about the rapes. Well, they will beat you on everything. If they don't like something, they will take you out into the corridor, beat up on you, and that's it. They had video cameras installed. Whatever they watch there and they don't like, they will just beat up on you. For 6 months, we will be walking with our eyes turned downward. But then that's what they did constantly. They forced us to sing Russian folk songs. If you don't know a song, lyrics, they beat up on you. Then they would tell us, give us the third line from the lyrics of the following song. And if you think for too long, they will start hitting on you. Being in Russian prison, it's one constant torture, physical or moral or mental, because they never treat you as a human being.
Мої рідні знали, бо ми їх попереджували, що ви йдемось по полон. Тому вони в принципі
My relatives knew that we will become prisoners of war. So, but neither ICIC nor other international organization confirmed that. I heard from an interview of one of our released POWs from Gorlivka that he saw some of the Russian Red Cross officials who were actually denigrating our military themselves. In summertime and the previous summer, I received the confirmation that my husband is a POW. But that's it. The Russians just gave the list of names to the Red Cross and then they just transfer it to Ukraine. That's it. But look into Geneva Convention, the individual cards, medical states, all that. But Russia doesn't follow the Geneva Convention rules, and the Red Cross is not forcing them to do so. I don't know how they choose whom to send where, but we have some boys who were contracted to fight in the army, and in 1 month they are imprisoned by the Russians, and then 5 of them were sentenced to life sentence, so they became lifers. Prisoners of war, that's one category, but another category are missing in action. And as it turns out, a lot of them might be in prison, but that's another form, not of even of torture, but of terror of Ukrainian civilians when they're not letting family members to know that they're kept in on black sites, not in official POW prisons. And these are constant, everyday tortures against POWs. Questions from the audience, please. I'm the attorney, Nataliia. I don't know whether I could tell you about this, but I should tell you this much. Well, such an atrocious picture, and but I see 4 girls and 1 guy. I am a wife of a military myself, but I cannot possibly handle speaking to prisoners of war. That's why I want to share such a deep respect into what you do. Thank you for your empathy and humanity. Next, I am not being so useful in helping the families of the prisoners of war because I don't see how efficient I could be there. So my question to you is this. I am the attorney myself, but I'm also a civilian, a member of the family of a military officer myself. How could we possibly be helpful in fighting for our POWs? I just cannot possibly understand how can we help some particular family to get a particular relative out of Russian imprisonment. Well, hello, Olegushin, Coordination Headquarters on Treatment of POWs. If you want to ask question how, come to us. We'll tell you all, but not here and not on the record, for sure. As for today's presentation, what can I say? We have not been involved in any way. You did it on your own. I mean, we only helped you with your report, but all we did was react to your requests, like give us access to the Russian POWs to interview them. That's all that we could do, allow you to do that. And the Russian soldiers, also the POWs, enjoy the right for privacy. So yeah, would like to see more interviews of them televised and shown on central TV channels. We have 5 prison camps with Russian prisoners of war. Just imagine how many of them in numbers. So anyone who would like to interview them, media people, well, come to our coordination headquarters. We have press officer responsible for the allowing access, so that you would come and see with your own eyes how they've been kept there, and to see how well they were treated, because we fully follow the Third Geneva Convention. A lot of Ukrainians dislike that. Well, we can empathize for that. A lot of people ask us, how come Ukraine is treating the Russian POWs so well, while we all can see the pictures of the released Ukrainian soldiers, how exhausted and hunger-struck are they? Well, just imagine that what you've seen on the pictures, the reality is much, much worse. Sometimes we cannot even show those pictures on big screen. Your conclusions and recommendations echo what we are trying to achieve. For the last 18 months, we are pushing the ICRC and through the Red Cross on the so-called Russian Federation to launch those mixed medical commissions with the humane and humanitarian goal in mind, having nothing to do with the military conflict. It's all about bringing back those who are heavily wounded, who would no longer be combatants. Seriously wounded and seriously ill. Ukraine established such commission 18 months ago, and unilaterally we sent back heavily wounded and heavily sick Russians back to the enemy, while the enemy not only doesn't recognize that, but refuses to speak to us. Even though we're not speaking directly to them, we speak through the neutral go-between, the ICRC, but ICRC fails to get any response from Russia, like, you don't like the people we suggested as candidates to be those medical examiners. We are ready to agree on any hyper-neutral doctors, but silence from that side. Advocacy is the best model of how to exercise pressure on the aggressor country in light of human rights protection. Universal jurisdiction is the new model of the international criminal justice that we need to use, and to use it by exercising pressure on those countries that are following the international jurisdiction principles that allow to launch criminal cases against criminals who perpetrated crimes in third countries. Like Germany could start a criminal case against a Russian who was perpetrating crimes against Ukrainians. We have not been in any way coercing or exercising any pressure on you guys. So all of the conclusions and recommendations that you made are your recommendations, but they follow the trends that currently acknowledge that use of torture is a systemic practice of Russia. Holding people incommunicado is a violation of human rights. Forcible or enforced disappearances and tortures, these are all crimes that have to be highlighted, and I agree that that should be a consistent, uniform policy of all Ukrainian government authorities. So thank you for raising this issue once again. Thank you for all your advocacy abroad and domestically. And you did mention bullet 4 of Formula of Peace, and Norway and Canada are responsible for that bullet, and that's probably why you courier brought your correspondence to those embassies, like you said. Дарія Коломієць, Суспільне ТВ, as a follow-up. What if we cannot impact the lists of those Ukrainian POWs that Russia is ready to exchange, to release as part of the prison swap? Do you know how the Russians select people for exchange? We heard that POWs from some brigades have not been exchanged. Others claim that they never released those who were only recently released, imprisoned. Well, let me tell you this much, and I'm sharing my opinion, not Amnesty International. When people say, oh, they brought back Azov soldiers, not others. But my brigade 93, only a handful of my comrades in arms were released from my brigade. But I could not see myself only claiming that Brigade 93 prisoners should be released. Everyone, Azov soldiers, everyone else have the right to be exchanged. We refuse to find any logic in the actions of Russians. It's all very chaotic. Of course, we try to figure out some trends, but we cannot find any sane, healthy logic behind what they do. So our approach is different. We create equal conditions for everyone to be released. Soldiers, civilians, children, only by creating the conditions to bring back everyone will guarantee fair and lasting peace. So what we can be really confident about is that the Russians will continue exposing our prisoners to torture. And Russians acting randomly, nobody can figure out what is the decision.
About where especially families apply pressure in protest. Because going to ICRC is obviously going to produce only so much results when it comes to what will happen in Russia. Similarly, over 2 years ago, Amnesty International had comments that were made that upset people. But when we go to protest at the American embassy or at other maybe UN-style organizational offices, perhaps more will be done. So can you speak to that a little bit about where, especially the frustration here, should be aimed and what should be expected? Дякую.
Лера додасть, Лера більше займається саме кампанією, але якраз ідея в тому, аби активно залучати українців.
Well, the idea behind this protest is to allow the relatives, the members of the households with prisoners of war to get involved, not necessarily those who are here in Ukraine and Kiev, but there are lots of those relatives who are refugees in European countries in particular, so that would be the way of exposing the local communities in those countries. And we remembered the case of John McCain, 5 years in prison, Charles de Gaulle, Winston Churchill, Sartre in France. Lots of examples that, well, Evgeny Stefaniev and Ivan Konovanets in Ukraine, these are all POWs. So there are samples of historic figures that might resonate in those countries when you bring up those examples. Unfortunately, the country at war, bleeding country, cannot do it on its own. Of course, international communities, national governments, especially from those countries where we have so many Ukrainian refugees, have to be more proactively involved in raising the awareness and advocating, allowing the Ukrainian voice to be heard. So we currently did it in the form of the letter that would be read out loud in the downtown squares of many capitals throughout the world. Yeah, I agree with Veronika. We did a lot working with POW relatives who live now abroad. Like, one thing, if we show French people a video from Ukraine, that's one thing. But when a mother tells the story of her family killed by the Russian bombardments and the son in Russian captivity, well, that's completely different. So we'll do whatever it takes to attract attention. In any form of that protest, whatever you call them, whoever is involved, will be there and will be involved. I would like to thank the Amnesty International and everyone who cares about this topic. My husband is a civilian, imprisoned. He's 75. A year ago, he was captured in Crimea, and he stays in prison for a year plus. Looking at what's going on worldwide right now, we have little optimism to believe that international organizations would become useful in helping to resolve this urgent problem. When I learned about the captivity of my husband, I was left on my own with this problem. No government institutions or authorities had the ability to help me out, except for NGOs, except for human rights activists. Only thanks to them, I survived, my husband survived. They launched the advocacy campaign and all that. But that's not enough. I believe that this government, our government authorities, who should be more proactive. We should not be the ones who tell those authorities with lots of people with high salaries paid by us taxpayers, they need to be involved. Sorry for being so straightforward and critical, but 1 year of my life in terror, fear and shame, but that's incomparable to what Ukrainian citizens go through there. And my husband was imprisoned because of his position, being very proactive in liberating Crimean Peninsula. So the government should focus a lot on civilian prisoners as well, not only prisoners of war. So today I heard that coordination headquarters conducted some sessions, or now they invite us to come to them, but how come I only heard it here today? I'm not claiming that TV marathons should tell about this to all of us, but somehow the authorities should be calling us, telling us, and suggesting how to get involved. Thank you for your comments. Stas Kazliuk, Novinarnya. Your report mentions civilians, 28 of them, right? When we talked to human rights activists, they say there's no tool in place for release of civilians because the national legislation doesn't even contain the provisions for exchanging the civilians. Are there some changes coming in the Ukrainian laws? What's the way out? There is the Fourth Geneva Convention. It's too vague, that's its biggest problem, and its interpretations might be misinterpreted. But if you interpret it the one and only legal way, then incarcerating civilians is qualified as a war crime with no statute of limitation, and perpetrators will be held liable. But the problem is that nobody talks about this that much. That's the big problem. But that's the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is very loose, very vague. And the problem of passportization, meaning that people are imprisoned because of the passport they held. But that's international jurisdiction principle in place. And it's the 11th day of war. Crimea was the first place where civilians were imprisoned, like my husband. And the only thing Geneva Conventions demands is immediate release, because the scale of crimes in Russia right now, it qualified as the war against humanity. Universal jurisdiction, the Fourth Geneva Convention, negotiating with foreign countries, making people visible. That's the important thing, making those people visible. And we work on urgent cases when we highlight those cases. And one of them is a civilian right now. Another one is a military medic, another case. When we start a case, we take it from the beginning to the end. And it's hard work, lots of effort to collect all the evidence and to have airtight case involving international community to help. There was one lady from OECD when I visited them 18 months ago, and she said, yeah, there is a legal qualification of all those actions. That's taking civilians as hostages. That's an act of terrorism. And they recognize it quite well. And then I tell them, well, how come you don't provide any legal opinion on that? Because nobody wants to qualify Russia as the terrorist state. They all want to continue diplomatic and economic ties with the biggest terrorist country in the world that possesses the largest nuclear arsenal. That's it. Terrorists with nuclear weapons are taking hostages and keep them someplace when nobody knows where they are.
Daily Corriere della Sera from Milano. We are definitely in difficult times, and you can imagine that the leader of the most important democracy, the largest, the more powerful, is today saying that the responsible of the war is the leader of your country, and today he will cut the support, the military support waiting for him, while Putin looks like the real defender of peace. In this situation, to talk about human rights, defense of right of prisoners is more complicated. That's why I'm asking you this question. We already spoke many times of this problem of the prisoners in the last 3 years. That's why I know that the number are classified, are military secrets, sometimes are very confused, but again, at least we have a number of the prisoners who had been freed, who had exchanged with the Russian. And these prisoners are here, are talking. So can we try to understand, can you give us more precise number, like, how many of these prisoners, how many are they? Even this number sometimes is not clear. And of them, clearly, how many had been tortured and how? That must be easier. Because when I tell to I'm talking, really to follow your indication, which are very clear. We have to go on to denounce this kind of crimes. In order, as a media person, in order to be more effective, when I give numbers, it's more important. If I say, I don't know now, 15,000 prisoners had been exchanged and 15,000 soldiers are back, of these, Amnesty knows, verified, that, I don't know, 7,000 had been heavily tortured. We talk occasionally with prisoners, yes, but if you are able to provide some of this figure, that will be much more useful for our work to help you. Thank you.
Дякуємо за питання. Ці номери
Thanks a lot for this question. It's the Russian Federation that should provide you with those figures, right? They don't give us those figures. But let me tell you what I know. According to the UN report, 97% of the POWs that were exchanged during prison swaps were subject to tortures. 72% of them had no communications with the outside world. They were all kept incommunicado. 25% is the percentage of those who were forcibly disappeared into Russia. So every fourth was imprisoned by Russians at the Ukrainian territory and then brought to Russia. We don't have the figure of how many Ukrainians are currently being imprisoned, because sometimes we see our soldiers on the Russian federal channels, and then we see their names. Then we go to Red Cross and we say, can you confirm the name of that person that he is in Russia? And they don't confirm it. So
questions. One is about the medical commission that the coordinating headquarters mentioned. So as far as I know, there was a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian ombudsmen for human rights in January, and there was an exchange in February of prisoners who are injured or ill. So can you say that there's some progress on this particular issue of medical commission? Okay. And second question about the ICRC. I know there's a lot of criticism, a lot of people calling for them to speak out. But what concrete difference do you think it would make if the ICRC spoke out? Like, how would that change the situation? And would it mean losing any possible point of influence on the situation of Ukrainian prisoners of war in Russia? Thank you.
Дякуємо за питання. Ми насправді
Thank you for this question. We are afraid of giving any recommendations to ICRC. All we can see, they haven't yet reached the point when they are ready to speak up. They haven't accumulated enough cases of terror and atrocities. We did accumulate enough to speak up and advocate all the time. Well, the last thing we want is to see our report as an argument between two international organizations. The only winner would be so-called Russia. So let the ICRC follow their mandate that has been imposed on them by Geneva Conventions. They're the only organization that could do that. There could be some other means and ways. Probably religious leaders could be allowed access to POWs. Why don't we think outside the box? Because UN, created after World War II, gave this mandate to Red Cross, and they managed to follow what they managed to follow, but we need to start thinking outside the box. What we do, we advocate for looking for additional ways and means. By the way, as part of our project, we ask the foreign embassies in Russia to visit the fake trials against the Ukrainian POWs in Russia. BBC, Жанна Безперчук. Do you have any contacts in Arab world? Because, as we know, some of those countries, they were instrumentally involved in prison swaps and release of some civilians. And even Maksym confirmed, what was that, United Arab Emirates, when they saw evidence of tortures against the released Ukrainian POWs were involved in it, did have some positive impact. Could it be that you can involve Arab world more? Well, we're a new team, and so far we received strong support from Turkey. On the 24th of February, for instance, they published the calendar of the Ukrainian kids that were killed last year with the pleas from their parents to stop this war. And they translated those calendars in Turkish language. And as soon as they published those calendars, well, we received already a handful of requests for interviews from Turkish journalists. Glory to Ukraine, glory to its heroes. Maksym, thank you for being candid. Two quick questions. As a veteran of the 47th Brigade, I would like to ask you, could you confirm or deny the myth that when we talk about some specific military units or military personalities, that it makes the prison swap difficult? And secondly, how many Ukrainians were swapped and how many were released? Because we tell our Ukrainian prisoners of war, stay sharp, persevere because sooner or later you will be swapped? Well, I will redirect this question to the coordination headquarters. I have no statistics at hand to share with you. The Russians hate Azov, they hate people from artillery forces and sharpshooters, snipers, or those who shoot from mortars or from cannons. So I know that they are the first victims, but I have no statistics to accompany those impressions that I had. As for the prison swap, remember Kharkiv counterattack, and we received so many prisoners, Russian prisoners, but for 1 week nobody was beating on us. They would not even bring dogs into our cells. They were in the state of shock, and for a while they received the instruction not to beat on us. But that continued only for 1 week. So the more Russian POWs we have, the better chances for prison swaps. Well, you are asking questions, and the answers to those questions will be in open access. But any details of our negotiations with the enemy should stay not, well, they should not be public, because the enemy will use any information that we make public against us. Of course, I have answers to most of your questions, but understand me correctly, I cannot make them public now. We'll have our next event at 1 p.m., but I would like to thank all of those as a mother of deceased soldier, I would like to support all of the NGOs who are joining their efforts to fight for our soldiers.
Я ці 10 років комунікую з такими організаціями.
Igor was killed in 2015, and for 10 years I'm communicating with lots of international human rights organizations, with Western journalists, and what I would like to see more is that there would be more investigations, more criminal cases launched against the perpetrators. But lots of journalists tell me, we cannot hear your voice. I want our voice to be heard there. I want the international community to know about the crimes perpetrated by Russia here. Of course, we all heard about Bucha and about Izium. I know ladies who were witnessing corpses of their husbands being unearthed at those mass graves in Izium. I don't want our government and our country to stay inert. Let's be more proactive. We cannot leave it like that.
Вибачте за такий експромт. Мене це дуже турбує.
Я дам маленький коментар, дуже маленький, і оскільки там є різні.
Brief comment from me. We stay in touch with former POWs. We have our own chats. I've been interviewed a handful of times, but I was at the brink of refusing interviews because every single time I go through those stories, I live through them. But every time I think enough is enough, then I decide that no, it's not enough. Even though there are so many people who come to me, who interview me, well, let's not blame ourselves, Ukrainians. Yeah, of course we could do more, and our authorities could do more, but there are so many NGOs, so many volunteers. It's the willingness to hear our stories, because when I visit those beautiful international conferences attended by beautiful people in beautiful suits, when in front of the picturesque lake in Switzerland they ask me, after all those discussions of torture, this and that, they go like, well, do you enjoy your stay here? And I say, well, my wife is in Ukraine, and this night there was air raid alarm in the town where she lives, and I couldn't hardly sleep. And they say, oh, fine, and they leave. Well, thank you for your comments. Thank you for those who help to bring our POWs and civilians back home.